Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined by my host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
I have nothing clever to say this time.
Oh, I knew that was going to be one of these times. I knew you could not sustain your creativity for that long. Oh, thank you for validating me. I appreciate that.
I have officially run out of stuff to say. Well, it was fun. Bye, guys.
Yeah,
See you never again.
It's going to make future episodes really, really dull, but less infuriating. So there's that.
Why do you hate me so much? What did I do?
Because you're awful.
I know that.
So this week we're going to have a discussion about mental health. A couple weeks ago we had a discussion about chronic illness, physical disability, and we did touch a little bit on mental illness, but I got a request from a listener to do an episode focused completely on the subject. So we have two guests here. Before I bring our guests in, I ran across something on the internet that I wanted to read here. That obviously we've talked a lot about bathrooms and trans issues and all that kind of stuff lately because that's what's been in the news. That's what people are struggling with, and obviously we're the new target of conservative lawmakers. So I read something here that I think puts that whole debate in pretty stark perspective. So this is a post that I read on Facebook. My daughter took her life today. I don't know how my heart will ever be the same. This is what I woke to on Facebook today. A message from a devastated mom in a support group I'm in. While some have irrational fears about bathrooms and are pissed about quote-unquote federal overreach, a mother is planning her daughter's funeral because it was all too much. The hate, the bigotry, the confusion, misinformation, and media hype, it was too much. Today, a mom is burying her child. Let's talk about real fears. Let's talk about who's being hurt, who is dying, who is really at risk. While you complain about our president and bathrooms and locker rooms and liberal agendas, a mother is choosing flowers for her child's grave, not prom, not homecoming. While you worry about imagined transgender predators attacking your children, our children are taking their lives because it's the better option to them. 54%. That's the suicide attempt rate for transgender youth who live unsupported. The chances of you being attacked by one of them in the bathroom? 0. This shouldn't have happened. This poor child, her mother, my heart is so heavy, and I'm so angry. Today a mom is burying her child, and it's so senseless and needless, and so goddamn scary. So, let's just remember that when we're having these debates, because it's really easy to get caught up in politics and forget about the human side of things. So, now that I've thoroughly brought everyone down, let's bring in our guests.
As we like to do.
Dr. Caleb Lack is an associate professor of psychology at the Counseling Practicum and the Counseling Practicum coordinator in the Department of Psychology at the University of Central Oklahoma. Welcome, sir.
Hi, everybody.
And JT Eberhard is a...
After that guy's got like 1 million letters after his name.
And here's JT Eberhard
stuff on the internet.
And JT Eberhard's a guy.
This is JT. He has opinions and he posts them online, and somehow is on the same platform as the guy with a PhD.
Well, I mean, you've got letters before your last name, though, JT.
That's true.
So it's cool.
Yeah.
What about letters in your last name? Have you thought of that?
All right, I'm ready. I'm good. Let's do this.
All right.
Dr. Lack,
All
you've
right,
met your
go.
match.
So I wanted to just kind of have a talk, dispel some myths, talk about the what it's really like to live with this kind of stuff, what it all means. And one of the things that I really would like to talk about is the concept of minority stress, because this is something that I actually found myself describing a lot before I knew it had a name. And I would constantly talk about this low-level stress that people were under that would eventually cause damage. And it was something that I described that I experienced, that it was like, it's not like I'm constantly in panic mode, but it's just kind of on guard all the time. And then eventually that kind of takes its toll. And then I happened to see somebody talking about it on Facebook, and I was like, oh my God, there's a word for this. So, let's just start, Caleb, let's talk about, if you had to pick like the most annoying, incorrect stigma about mental illness, what would you say that it would be?
Well, I'm as a clinical psychologist, I encounter a lot of ridiculous notions about mental illness sort of all the time. And probably the biggest one that from a scientific standpoint really irks me is that mental illness is some sort of a dichotomous thing. So in other words, you either have some sort of mental disorder or you don't. And the truth is, just like all of human behavior, it exists on a continuum. So it's not that I'm depressed or I'm not, it's how depressed are you? It's not that I have intrusive unwanted thoughts versus I don't. It's, well, okay, how many intrusive unwanted thoughts do you have? And so for me, that's a huge key to understanding and really creating empathy, is that it's not that everyone who has, some sort of a diagnosis is qualitatively different from other folks. It's that we all experience these emotions, these cognitions, these problematic behaviors at times. But these are folks who just have gone to a little bit of an extreme. And so for me, that sort of lack of understanding really sort of creates an other situation. You can say, oh, those are folks with mental illness, right? Those are people that are very different from me, rather than being able to say, hey, this is somebody who is just a little further down the normal curve from me. They're not on some different planet. They're experiencing some of the same things I do, but just more frequently, or they're more problematic for that person.
And JT, what do you think?
Oh man, can I do two?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, the first one is every time you see someone commit a mass shooting in America, well, I'm happy to see the conversation go to how can we have better support system for the mentally ill in the United States. We immediately hear like, oh, he was mentally ill. And so you conflate all mental illnesses under one umbrella, and you make people afraid of people with mental illness. And so there's this perception that mentally ill people are more dangerous at large. That one gets old after a while. For someone like me who's a recovering anorexic, we get conflated with people who have antisocial personality disorder, and it's just not fair. The other one would be with something like chronic depression or anorexia, where people think it's a personal flaw or a lack of fortitude on the part of the afflicted, and they should just will themselves out of it, as if you could will yourself out of any condition, and doesn't say that they're really sick, because then people start thinking, oh, this is my fault, I'm to blame, and you get all this guilt compounding an already serious condition, usually.
Yeah, well, and it's really fun, too, when the mental illness thing is brought up in shootings, and someone's like, okay, cool, so, like, if that happens to be the case, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
Yeah, stop it, because that's not what it's about.
Yeah, and mental health care in the United States sucks balls. It's so terrible. It's so bad. My wife has an undergrad in neuro. She's going to med school to be a psychiatrist. I get to hear this from her all the time about how bad it is. So whenever that happens, I'm happy to hear the discussion about, we need to improve the mental health system here in the United States. But one, it never winds up happening. And two, it makes people, like I said, afraid of anyone who's mentally ill with any mental illness, not just, something that could make them kill a bunch of people.
Yeah, I think that, what JT's talking about in terms of the dangerousness of folks who have these mental health diagnoses is very concerning, because we know from tons of research that folks who have mental health diagnoses, whether it's depression or schizophrenia or something else, are much more likely to be victims of crime, of violence, of abuse, rather than the opposite.
God damn it, I was going to say that. Why does this guy have a PhD?
Sorry about that.
No, don't be. No, it's an excellent point.
And I think, obviously, having a PhD after your name, I would guess that your reason for being on the show is pretty obvious. But JT, you mentioned being a recovering anorexic. Do you mind just kind of telling your story with that?
Oh, God. No, I don't mind. I've had a glass of wine, so if the waterworks come on, I apologize.
Oh, you're fine. I cry on the show all the time.
Oh,
so,
okay.
yeah, no shame.
I was for many years. I was in the why can't I just will myself out of this? Why can't I just choose to be better or happier? And I blamed myself for a while, and that actually made it worse. And I had a friend in college who was studying psychology who almost literally drugged me to a doctor, kicking and screaming, after I'd lost 30 pounds in like a month. And oh god, it was. So the doctor's asking me, a bunch of questions to determine the severity of my thought process, and asked me if you ever thought about killing yourself. And I of course I had, but I hadn't told anybody that. And so my friend's sitting right there in the room, and I had to say yes, and I felt horrible. And he prescribed me my first SSRI, which is the one I presently take after trying some others. And after a few weeks, it was just world is like waking up. Like literally, everyone's like, "Oh, it's like seeing color in the world." Like it really is like that. It's like almost being transplanted into another person's body, and you realize, like, you're just ecstatic. You're just euphoric. And as time goes on, you come to realize that that's what normal actually feels like. But you just didn't know. But as far as the change,
people aren't filled with an empty void all the time.
Yeah, and I want to be happy, and I even acknowledge I have no my life is so good. I have so many things good in my life. I'm in terms of the cosmic lottery winners, I'm at the top of the pile, and just was unhappy. And you feel guilty then, because like, why am I unhappy?
You feel bad for feeling bad, kind of thing.
Yeah. So things that changed, and for people like me, I used to weigh myself minimum 10 times a day, almost certainly more. And you start developing little tricks to it. You weigh less in the morning. You weigh less after a shower, which you wouldn't think you would because you'd have water all over you, but you actually weigh about 2 pounds less. You weigh slightly less after going to the bathroom. And so you do all these things. You make sure to like shave every piece of body hair you can when you're in the shower. Like you get up earlier so you weigh less. It's just like, and that number on the scale, it's just... It's kind of a double-edged sword, because if it goes up even 1/10 of a pound, like you just start bawling and it's the end of the world. But if it goes down, it's the one thing in your life when you're in that kind of position that makes you happy. Like it's the one bit of elation you can find. And what's really fucked up, can I say effed up about it on the air?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, so what's really fucked up about it is that you get this one outlet to happiness, and the rest of the time it just consumes your thought process. And so then, of course, you want to do it more. You want to starve yourself even more. But then, like, when your friends notice you're losing all this weight and they try to intervene and be like, dude, this isn't healthy, like, your brain convinces you that your friends are the enemies because they're trying to take this one outlet to happiness you have away from you. Like, anytime they tell you, like, dude, stop weighing yourself 20 times a day, you're like, why do you want me to be miserable all the time?
Right.
And it kind of closes you off and prevents you from getting health. It kind of drags you into this, I know this sounds totally cliche, but this really dark place. And if you're the type who's been brought up around, stop being such a weenie and just, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and, buck up, kid.
This is America.
Yeah, it's America. Then there's you are kind of prohibited from getting help through by your own psyche. And you just kind of pinned there, and it can actually be a just thoroughly miserable experience. It's no fault of the afflicted, and that's where I was. Got on meds, got off meds, tried to kill myself, got back on them recently, and I'm happy.
And so,
that's the story.
I mean, did you feel an extra stigma being a guy? Because I feel like there's a stereotype that eating disorders are a girl thing. And was there a dimension like, well, this doesn't happen to guys. What's wrong with you, kind of thing? Like, did you ever experience any of that?
That's actually a really good question. Me personally, I've been an LGBT rights activist for forever. My parents were LGBT rights activists. I grew up around it. And so I don't, and then once again, it sounds really arrogant, like I don't see gender in things, but I really didn't. It did strike me as that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But like for every one man, there's like 10 women that turn up anorexic. So it does strike men a lot less. I had a thought beyond that, but I guess no, it didn't strike me as weird because I was a man.
Well, and so another thing that you mentioned is getting on medications, and I feel like there's a stigma with that too. Like, why do you need a medication? Why can't you just meditate or exercise or take these essential oils, like that kind of stuff? And
Dr. Lack may correct me on this, but as far as my understanding goes, for people who have a minor type of depression, a relative died and you're depressed, or you have a chronic minor depression, medicine actually works hardly any better than a placebo. SSRIs don't have that much of an effect. In that case, you're better off to go with therapy. But for someone like me, therapy has never worked. And I've been to multiple therapists. Maybe I just haven't found the right one, but it's never been good for me. But for people with a severe chronic depression like I have, meds work fantastically. All sorts of studies establish that they work fantastic. So, I mean, it's just really depends on who you are. But, I mean, we make every decision we make in life in the interest of getting what we want. I mean, that's what it means to choose something. You're deciding what you want more, right? And what we want more is generally predicated upon what will make us happy, right? I mean, every decision we make. That's why we have jobs we hate, because we'd be happier having a job and having a house than being homeless, right?
Right.
So as long as happiness is the goal, I don't see why taking a pill to help you maintain happiness, which is really to help maintain normalcy, let's be real. But even if it were to help maintain happiness, why is that more shameful than playing basketball or going shopping and spending a lot of money or, fucking anything that walks?
Right.
They're all fine outlets to happiness. So why is there shame in this one if it gets the same job done,
Right. Dr. Lax, does that ring true for you?
Yeah, so most of our newer research shows that for mild to moderate anxiety, depression, across a lot of those sort of mood and anxiety disorders, that placebos and SSRIs are about equal. And it's really only when you get into this sort of severe level depression, mood, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, that you start seeing a above placebo level effect. Depending on the specific issue, you can either see an additive effect with therapy, with what we call evidence-based therapies, which unfortunately is not what the vast majority of folks out there are actually doing. Or you can see no effect in terms of additive, in terms of medication versus therapy. So, for example, with panic disorder, really great effects from cognitive behavioral therapy, good effects from medication, nothing additive there. So in other words, if you combine the two, that doesn't like double the effect or anything like that. So I think, JT was certainly right about that aspect.
I'm done. I retire. I'm going to Disney World.
Hashtag nailed it.
Okay.
Something I could do with a very sexy lady friend of mine that people would find provocative, interesting, and entertaining enough to tune in week after week. Oh, I know! A podcast! If you'd like to hear me and Kate be provocative and thought-provoking week after week, join us on the Unbuckling the Bible Belt podcast. We'd love for you to be part of our audiological three-way.
What's up, everyone? My name is Jamie, and I am with an organization called A Voice for the Innocent. We are a community of support for people who are affected by sexual violence. We are super excited to announce that we have partnered with the Vans Warped Tour to launch the Save Our Scene campaign. It's an initiative to reduce sex crimes in the music industry, and we've been working tirelessly to make sure it's as powerful as it can be. We've written an in-depth training for the bands on the tour to help them better understand the scope of the problem and learn how they can be part of the solution. We've done hours upon hours of research to compile every last resource we can find for people who have experienced sexual violence. We then took these resources, sorted them by location, and created state-specific free literature to hand out to music fans at every date of Warped. On top of that, we will be reaching out to people at every stop to let them know that we are another resource for them, and if they have a story to tell, we have a place where people will listen. This is, quite frankly, the largest project we have ever taken on, and we are extremely excited to have this opportunity, but we need your help. Sending 2 people on tour costs money, not to mention the cost of printing literature for every date on top of all the materials we will need to make our campaign have the largest impact possible. This includes a tent, merchandise bins, dollies, and all the other odds and ends that come with touring and implementing this campaign. We are asking for your donations. Anything you can give will get us closer to our goal of reaching as many people on the tour as possible. To donate or to learn more, visit saveourscene.org. Thank you to everyone who is able to help us in this endeavor. And as always, thank you so much to those of you who have already helped us along the way. Hopefully we will see you out at Warped Tour.
Another thing that I'm curious about, something that doesn't get talked about a lot, and it's something that's kind of personal to me lately, is, eating disorders. I think if we're talking about the spectrum of mental illness, I feel like eating disorders are pretty visible in that way. But
it depends on which eating disorder you're talking about.
That's fair.
So, yeah. So, just throw that out there.
No, that's good. What about mental illness's contribution to obesity? Is there a certain kind of illness that contributes to that, or are you familiar with any research in that area?
Well, I mean, there's certainly a number of folks who, with depression, will experience very high levels of eating, overeating, and then of course you have things like certain eating disorders, binge eating disorder, which can not help you maintain a healthy weight or cause massive increases in your weight. But it's not as if, like even with depression, everybody who's depressed overeats. You have the other side as well. So people who will just stop eating or eat very, very little. Right. That's one of the kind of tricky things about a lot of these diagnoses is that you can see in either extreme. So, with generalized anxiety, I have a sleep disturbance usually. And that means I can either be sleeping a lot to avoid things, or I can be not sleeping at all because I'm staying up worrying all night. Mm-hmm. And people will often just kind of see one or the other of those and think that's what this particular symptom is. But a lot of times it can be disturbed in either direction.
Yeah, well, the reason I ask is because I've struggled with my weight my entire life, and I've always I kind of had myself convinced that I wasn't an emotional eater. That, I just was I lost the lottery when it comes to, slow metabolisms and all that kind of stuff. And I've really noticed lately that the more that I really try to get a handle on things, the more that I'm just freaking out about it. I went to a seminar, to start the process to enroll in a program for weight loss surgery. And the doctor was talking about all of these major lifestyle changes that that you have to make, and I found myself. I was sitting in the chair shaking and crying because of how scary all of that was for me, and it's so disconcerting because in so much of my life I'm such an ambitious make it happen. This is a goal that I have, so I'm going to do it kind of person, and It's the feeling bad for feeling bad kind of thing. What the hell is wrong with me that I can't just make this happen like I have everything else in my life? So it's something that I'm probably going to have a good amount of therapy for and all that kind of stuff. But that's the reason that I asked. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's just it's amazing to me how many just red alarms were going off in my head when it's just no, you can't eat fast food every day and be healthy. Let's not do that. And in my head, that's obviously a logical thing because that's terribly unhealthy. But I'm also just thinking oh my God, how am I going to enjoy eating ever again if I can't have McDonald's every day? It's, yeah.
The brain does that, man. It's so weird. It's so strange to know that your brain is deceiving you, but nothing you can really do about it. It's to be aware that you can't trust your own mind.
Yeah, and that's a big thing that we see across a lot of, folks who struggle with mental illness is that they actually do trust their mind, but their mind is not necessarily telling them the right thing, right? So, if I'm depressed, one of the things that I do differently from folks who are non-depressed is perceive and pick up on certain information around me. And the way that I describe it a lot of times to my students is that folks who, are depressed or whether they're anxious, they're living in a different subjective world than somebody who's not depressed or anxious. They're seeing different things. They're paying attention to different things. They sort of got depression-colored glasses on, if you will. And then they believe that, right? They believe that what they're thinking is accurate. They don't stop to question that. And then a lot of times they have huge amounts of behavioral inertia as a result of that. So I don't change, or it's hard for me to change that behavior because, well, this is what I've been thinking for so long. It's how I've been acting for so long. It's really, a tough thing to change.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how cognitive behavioral therapy works, is learning how to challenge those, negative or self-defeating or sometimes even, inaccurate or irrational types of thought patterns. And then once you get into the point where you can start to see how your mind is kind of deceiving you and kind of get into a more realistic way of looking at things, then you can start to put those thoughts and feelings into practice in your behavior.
Damn, Ari did her homework before this episode.
Well done, Ari. Yeah, that's definitely the cognitive
I have a bachelor's
aspect.
in psychology, and I've been through CBTs myself, so I know a bit about this stuff. Obviously not as much as a PhD, of course, but...
No, like in my case, I went through a period in Ohio for, about a year and a half where I was anorexic athletic, which is, you just work out compulsively until you throw up, go back out, work out until you throw up again. It's just, which I always say, if you're going to have a mental disorder, get the one that gets you in super good shape really quick, right? If you got to have one.
Gotta look on the bright side, right?
Right.
Yeah. But even then, I got down to where I was 170. I could deadlift 400 pounds one time at max.
Holy shit.
So I've got but I've got all this quantitative data that tells me I'm in decent shape and that I'm not fat, and I just can't see it. And the way I conveyed it to my wife was like, imagine you see every tree made out of crystal, but like you have to trust everyone else's assessment. Like you can read in Wikipedia that trees are made out of bark. Everyone's telling you trees are made out of bark. So even though that's what you see, you just get to the point where you like have to try to see the world through everyone else's eyes if you're going to get by. But it really is kind of a separation from reality. And being aware of it is just the weirdest thing.
Wow, I've never heard it put like that before. That actually kind of puts some things in perspective.
Yeah, that is so true in my personal
You're welcome.
experience.
Guest to the stars.
Going through, I've been through CBT for generalized anxiety disorder and depression, and one of the hardest things for me was, because I'm an atheist, I'm a skeptic, I feel like, I'm always trying to be rational all the time and see, the world as it really is. And it was so hard for me to realize that the way that I was thinking about myself and the way that I thought other people were thinking about me was just not accurate. I was just thinking, I'm a bad person. I have to be perfect or I'm not a good person. And, everyone, if I do the tiniest little thing wrong, then everyone's going to be judging me negatively for it.
And the worst part of that is it makes any love or care for you feel like pity. Like it just invalidates all of it.
Yeah, so that was something that I had to work through with my therapist. It was really hard for me at first going through CBT because I was like, well, this is just like trying to trick myself into believing something that I don't believe. But once I actually, went through the exercises of, how to challenge your negative thinking, I realized that the way that I was seeing the world actually wasn't accurate. And, I was actually seeing things a lot more negatively than, other people were, or than that someone who doesn't have anxiety or depression would see them. So again, CBT, highly recommended. Do it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we very commonly hear, Ari, is folks who are in therapy. Well, I feel like I'm lying to myself if I try and argue, with this automatic negative thought, with this depressive thought, with this anxious thought, and it does take a while, because we're not raised or brought up to question our own thoughts, Even those of us who move into skepticism or are born into skepticism and atheism.
Design my ass.
Yeah, we just don't. That's not a natural thing for us to do. Sort of say, oh, well, let me think about my thinking and see if that thinking's accurate. We're not really geared up for a lot of that metacognitive activity. We're really good at seeing it in other people, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you're really depressed, you can be like, oh, okay, well, I'm calling bullshit on that, right? Like, this is why that's not accurate for you. But for me, it's totally true.
Exactly. Yes.
And I do a lot of work with folks who have obsessive compulsive disorder. And I see a lot of very odd beliefs and odd behaviors in that. And one of the ways that I help normalize it for people is I tell them about other people that I've seen in terms of here's what this person believed. Here's what this person believed. And I always get this response of like, wow, that's crazy. But mine is totally accurate, though.
Right.
Right. It's like, I can see
It's
where
so
that's
true.
ridiculous. But for me, like, it's right. It's right on.
No, exactly. And that's one of the things that I do. If someone else is telling me like an anxious or depressive thought that they're having, I just like magnify it in a way to like make it seem so absurd. Like they're like, oh, I did something wrong and everyone's going to be judging me for it. I'm like, yes, everybody hates you because of that. And I'm just like, I'm taking what I would actually think about myself in that situation and just magnifying it so that I can help the other person realize how ridiculous that sounds. But then when I do it, that's totally fine because that's the truth.
Right.
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in physics, I learned that I'm a loser.
Today in school, I learned that I'm ugly and useless. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. In history, I learned that I'm trash.
Today in school, I learned that I have no friends. In English, I learned that I make people sick. And at lunch, I learned that I sit on my own because I smell. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me.
In biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. And in math, I learned that I'm trash.
The only thing I didn't learn in school today?
The only thing I didn't learn today.
The only thing I didn't learn
is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov.
The staff of Secular Coalition for America lobbies U.S. Congress on issues of separation of church and state, and they've become a powerhouse for change in the United States government. You'll definitely want to subscribe to receive their email action alerts. These are updates for important issues and ones that you can get involved with directly. And hopefully, you'll consider making a contribution to the Secular Coalition for America to help them continue fighting for your equality. You can do it all at secular.org.
And so what do we know about the causes of these kind of things? I mean, obviously mental illness is a huge topic, so it's probably not just, nailed down to one subject. But like, for example, I know people who have struggled with things their entire lives, whether it's, depression, anxiety, OCD, borderline personality disorder, all of these different things. And then there are some things that don't develop until later, or maybe even after certain circumstances. And the reason that I ask is because for me, before I came out as trans and started transitioning, I was good enough at denial that, I had pretty much like an average, like middle class white male existence. And I didn't really struggle with a whole lot, except for the times when I couldn't put my gender struggles on the back burner for, however long it was. And when I started coming out and I started confronting these things and I started being really aware of my surroundings and if people were laughing at me or talking about me, or, I was worried something bad was going to happen at work, or I was worried that my friends were going to stop liking me. And I was under so much stress and I got really anxious and really depressed about circumstantial things. So it was like I could point to there's this thing going on in my life and I'm really, really down about it to the point where like, I'm not even sure I want to wake up tomorrow, but I could point to a cause. It wasn't something that just kind of came out of the blue. Like I hear sometimes happens with people who deal with depression. Like, I mean, it just happens. And then once I moved past those circumstances and I'm relatively settled in life, things are generally pretty okay. I mean, there's still a lot that I struggle with, but it's not an everyday like, oh my God, my life is about to fall apart kind of thing. But I find those feelings coming back up almost randomly now. And, it's something where, I cope with it well enough that it's not something that I really care to see a therapist about to get like a diagnosis or treatment, because I feel like I'm self-aware enough that it doesn't really affect my life and, affect the way that I live my life. But I just wonder, like, are there things like that can cause damage that will just, that's something that like I'm just going to have to live with from now on? Or what are your thoughts on that whole big rant that I just made?
So when we look at most specific mental disorders, what we find is that in general, there are certainly differences. But in general, you can account for 40 to 60% of it through biological means, and another, again, the flip side, 40 to 60% of it through environmental aspects. And those biological means aren't necessarily just pure, genetics. You can talk about things like epigenetic factors that are activating. But environmentally, if you want to talk about big scale risk factors, it's early trauma. It's growing up in a lower socioeconomic status, and it's not having high levels of social support. And those are the three big things that allow you to predict almost any mental health issue. There are some differences, things like, for example, bipolar disorder and schizophrenia are more biologically based than environmentally based. But just speaking sort of generally, those are the three big risk factors for literally any kind of mental health problem. And so, what you talked about in terms of, some people just sort of seem to have depression kind of come out of nowhere. Other people have a very clear activating event. That's where we see that, maybe some people are more heavily biologically weighted versus having an environment that sculpts them to have more of these maladaptive behaviors, cognitions, emotions.
And so, I mean, would that account for the phenomenon of minority stress? Because you mentioned, early trauma, lower socioeconomic status, lack of social support. I mean, that kind of sounds like, any sort of marginalized group, whether we're talking about race or class or gender or sexuality, would be more at risk of those things, therefore more at risk of mental illness. Is that a reasonable line to draw there?
Yeah. So if we look, for example, here in the United States, the minority populations, whether you're talking about a racial ethnic minority or religious minority or folks who are, struggling day to day, sort of poor, you see higher rates of mental health problems. And that's really kind of across the board. Now you see some differences in there in terms of like what minority group might have more or less kinds of specific mental health problems. But generally speaking, yeah, that's a huge aspect in terms of that link between things like, what you're referring to as minority stress and mental health difficulties.
And then, even once they develop those problems, access to care is such a huge issue in this country. And especially if you are someone of a lower socioeconomic status or someone without a lot of social support in some kind of a marginalized group, it's, it can be really difficult for people to access mental health care or any kind of health care.
Totally agree. And, one of the, I think, big issues that we have is not just access to mental health care, but access to appropriate mental health care.
Right.
So, it's not just that I can walk into any therapist office across the United States and I can be assured that I'm going to get top-notch, gold standard, evidence-based treatment that's been, found out to work better than a placebo through these specific controlled trials. Chances are I'm not going to get that, actually. And that plus the issue of minority stress is actually one of the reasons why recovering from religion helped to found the Secular Therapy Project because of the really big stressors in terms of being non-theistic and finding someone to see that wasn't going to try and convert me, which would just make therapy much worse, as you can imagine.
Yeah, that's something that I hear from my trans friends all the time. You know, I mean, there's 100 therapists within 10 miles of my house, but how many of them are trans competent? You know, I mean, it's so scary to me how many people I know who have had to educate their healthcare providers on what they need. And you hear things like, you know, people are struggling because they can't access transition-related care, but their mental health professionals are keeping them from accessing that care because of the mental health problems that they have. And it's like the most sickening cycle. And it's, yeah. And, you know, I mean, I'm not a mental health professional, so like, I don't know, you know, each person's individual situation to make a judgment call there. But, I mean, it's amazing to me just anecdotally how many times I see people who really struggle with things when they get that competent care, how those problems just seem to disappear, or at least become, you know, manageable and not such a driving force in people's lives.
Yeah. And and speaking as a mental health professional who literally trains other mental health professionals for a living, it's very sad. I mean, it is not the typical thing to just randomly walk into a therapist's office, whether you're talking about a psychologist or a marriage and family therapist or professional counselor or, you know, licensed clinical social worker. It's not the typical thing to walk into that office and they go, okay, well, here's what we know works for that based on this kind of evidence, and I'm competently trained in that, so let's go. I mean, that is unfortunately the rare occurrence in many, many areas in the United States.
Well, yeah, it's funny how many times I hear somebody talk about how lucky they were to find the therapist that they had. And I mean, I'm one of them. You know, I feel like I hit the lottery with the therapist that I got because she specializes in seeing trans clients, and she happens to be one of 2 therapists who can refer to the best endocrinologist in Cincinnati. So it was just like, you know, I was extremely lucky. And then I have so many friends who are like, I have no idea where to go. And, you know, they can't afford the therapist that I can afford because she's not on any insurance panel. So I pay her out of pocket $75 every time I see her, you know, so it's just, yeah, it's really tough.
Yeah.
So you brought up just a second ago, recovering from religion and the Secular Therapist Project. So let's talk about that intersectionality for a second, because something I hear all the time that pisses me off. Tell him, Callie. Yeah, because I'm so shy about talking about things that piss me off.
I'm your hype queer.
Yeah, you're hype queer. Oh, that's my favorite.
Everyone needs one.
That's my favorite word ever. So a lot of times what you hear in some of the more like firebrand atheist conversations is that religion equals mental illness.
Oh yeah,
JT, you've been quiet for a minute, so I want to have you react to that first.
Did you see my eye roll?
I did. I saw the eye roll. Yeah, it was hard too. I mean, it was a hard eye roll.
Religion's not a mental illness. People can be wrong and not be mentally ill. Being wrong is something completely sane people can do. What's more, a mental illness is something that props up no matter what your influence is, right? If you put me in a vacuum, I'd still be anorexic, right? But you take people away from the constant reassurance they get out of their church community, from exposure to the Bible, and they're probably not going to be that type of religious. That's just reinforcement over time. That affects anybody, sane or not. So no, it's not a mental illness.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I hear pretty frequently that I think is really ridiculous.
And what's more, sorry to interrupt. Now that I have this thought,
go ahead.
What's more, when you say religion is a mental illness like that, you're implying that mental illness is a bad thing, which just makes people more ashamed to have it, which compounds the guilt, which keeps people from getting treatment. Stop doing that. It's not a mental illness. Mental illness is not bad. Just say they're fucking wrong, because that's what they are.
Right.
Or
say they're not putting in the effort to be critical thinkers. That's something to be ashamed of. Sorry, Caleb, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you're fine, Bo. I was just wanting to make sure you were done.
No, I'm done.
Okay. No, you're fine.
Disney World.
Again.
I
making
really
many
like
trips.
Disney World.
Many trips. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not a mental illness, especially if you understand anything about the construction of mental disorders and sort of how we as a society socially construct those and determine what is or is not. I mean, by that sort of a metric, we 400 years ago, atheists would have been considered to have mental illness, which obviously is not ridiculous. Just because you have a mismatch between beliefs and environment doesn't necessarily mean that you have some sort of a maladaptive, problematic mental health diagnosis.
Yeah, well, and I think that goes back to how do we define mental illness in the first place? I mean, you said maladaptive, and that's that's a big word for basically meaning it makes it tough to live in your environment, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's no single agreed upon definition of psychopathology or mental illness or mental disorders or anything like that. But what the definitions that are out there tend to agree on is that they're maladaptive. So it's where you have some sort of a behavioral, biological, emotional, cognitive dysfunction that decreases your ability to effectively navigate your environment. And whether it harms you personally or it harms interpersonal relationships or, you're harming other folks, it can happen or manifest in a lot of different ways, but in some way it doesn't help you succeed at life.
Kind of the rule of thumb that a lot of people use is that it negatively affects your ability to live, to love, or to work.
Yeah.
Nicely put, Ari. Nicely put.
And similarly, how do you react to people who say that being gay or that being transgender is like automatically a mental illness?
I slap them in the face. I advocate for violence.
Good.
I'll contradict Ari and say I don't advocate for that at all because people are the product of their environments. I hate religion about as much as any person on the planet. I think it's terrible for the world. I think it's terrible for individuals. I work every day to try and remove religion from the planet. But I was convinced that Jesus was true up until probably about 20 years old. People who are grown up hearing that, being gay is a mental illness or that being atheist is somehow pathological. I view them as more victims most of the time than assholes. Now, granted, some of them are probably assholes and deserve the face slap. I'm not gonna make a universal statement there, but I think you got to give them the chance to say, look, if anyone should decide whether or not being trans or gay is a mental illness, it should be the psychological community, right? The experts.
Mm-hmm.
That's not you and me. So let's see what they say. And of course they say it's not. They should at least be given that chance and then the face slapping,
But what about the whole liberal conspiracy that all the scientists have among one another to, push their liberal agenda upon the world?
And that one fake association of pediatricians that has like 20 members that everyone points at.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, as a member,
and who is the one to expose this liberal conspiracy? Oh, your pastor without a single degree in psych. Imagine that. Does this seem a little strange to you?
As a member of the liberal science Illuminati,
I knew it.
I can just
revealed
say that
revealed here on the
exist.
Gaytheist Manifesto.
That's right.
Totally got
We do not exist, so therefore stop worrying about us.
Perfect. I believe you 100%. I accept that statement uncritically.
Yeah.
Pay attention to the psychologist behind the curtain.
That's right.
Oh,
You're not being all manipulated right now, subconsciously. If you find yourself on Amazon purchasing large numbers of my book later, it has no relationship to what I've been saying right now. So.
Oh, that's perfect.
I mean, I think JT is spot on in that, obviously our belief systems are very highly bound to our environment, to our learning history, to what we've been exposed to.
Disney World.
And I think it's really important, when people say things like, being trans is a lie, that, you're lying to yourself, or, it's a mental illness, or, being gay is a mental illness. I think it's important to sort of educate about, okay, well, who decides what a mental illness is? Because if you looked in the second edition of the DSM, homosexuality was in there as a mental illness.
Well, right, and being transgender was until the second to last edition, if memory serves.
So gender identity disorder was what it was called in the DSM-4. And the DSM-5, the newest edition that came out in 2013, the name changed to gender dysphoria. They dropped sort of the disorder part. Mm-hmm. And if there's a DSM-6, it's going to be dropped altogether, I think, just like homosexuality was, because it's recognized that, well, this is just a variation on behavior, right? Like this isn't necessarily good or bad. It's like having brown hair or being short or, whatever. It's just a variation, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing.
People back in that time when it was on the DSM, they would have pointed you straight to it and say, look, the experts say it, case closed. Like nowadays, they'd be like, oh, liberal conspiracy. Right. Can't have it. Can't have it.
Yeah. Well, my endocrinologist, and I mean, he's not a mental health professional, obviously, but, I was having a conversation with him once, because, we talk, he's a nice guy. And, he said, his belief as a person who, I mean, as an endocrinologist, he specializes in seeing trans patients. And his whole thing is being transgender is a physical condition, not a mental one. And, in my mind, that makes sense. I'm obviously not a mental health professional. You might have some thoughts on that. I don't know.
Well, I kind of am taken aback a bit by the whole body-mind dichotomy, which is what I would have said earlier, Callie, if you'd asked me what's my biggest pet peeve about people's
way to ignore Ari, Callie.
There you go.
If you knew what a terrible person Ari was, like, I'm still not convinced why I have them on my show. But that's a topic for another episode.
Well, now that I'm crying.
Oh, God!
What was I going to say again?
Go ahead. Body-mind dichotomy.
Yes. Yeah, and that is something that I think comes from, especially our culture's, Christian Protestant background, is that there's your body and then there's your real self, which is your soul or your mind. And, we know now from science that that's not necessarily the case, and that consciousness and personality and all the things that make you are coming from your brain, which is a physical organ. And physical organs can get sick sometimes. You don't shame somebody for having diabetes because they have to take insulin. So why would you shame somebody for, having depression and they have to take an antidepressant? Same kind of thing. So this is a whole other topic from what you were going on, Callie, but I personally don't.
No, that's fine. If you've got something to say, take it there. That's fine.
Yeah, so the brain is a physical organ that can get sick. So it is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to separate out, mental health from physical health necessarily. Although, a lot of times the symptoms of mental health are not something. Well, I mean, they are physical a lot of times. Like if you're having a panic attack, that's an extremely physical sensation, but there are also emotions and thoughts that go along with it. So it's more complicated than it's just physical, because it definitely affects your emotions and your thoughts. But again, your emotions and thoughts are products of your physical brain.
Well, right, but I mean, there's that diversity. I mean, if we're talking about things that are generally considered things that are purely physical, right? Like, you don't treat cancer by putting a cast on your foot. You know what I mean? Like those are very physical conditions that have, that are completely different from one another. But that, it doesn't necessarily mean that those things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Just like the comparison between, mental and physical health. That's why it bothers me so much that there's such a stigma around, getting help for mental illness, because it's like, do people question your character when when you get cancer? They're like, well, what did you do to deserve this? You know what I mean? Like, well, I mean, some people yeah. I said that and immediately was like, no, actually, shit, some people do. Well, and in fairness,
you did sodomy, right? You're going to get the right. Cancer.
Well, and in fairness, some people do that with physical disability too, though, right? Like, if they see somebody in a wheelchair who can move their legs, it's like, well, you're just faking it. Like, that's not real. So maybe that's not even a fair comparison to make, because people are a lot of times similarly skeptical of people's physical disabilities. So maybe that was a bad comparison to make in the first place.
People are assholes. That's the lesson.
Oh my God.
I mean, I think when something's not overtly viewable, like when you look at someone who has, for example, an autoimmune disorder, and you can't see literally, their mast cells twitching out of control or whatever. it does incur that doubt in a lot of folks who are like, maybe you're just making that shit up, right? And the same thing with mental health problems. So, you're anxious, really? What do you got to be anxious about? Come on, stop being anxious. And then you can say, okay, well, shit, I hadn't tried that. I tried all these other things, but that's the one thing I hadn't tried. Oh, there you go.
I didn't think about just stopping.
Yeah, that hadn't entered my mind at all. I wonder why my therapist hadn't had that.
Yeah.
So. Part of that is that, people see that sort of mind-body duality rather than just, no, it's all the same thing. Not.
Thank goodness Johnny C. Lehman is on the case. I've been seeing a therapist this whole time. Damn.
Johnny C. Lehman. I'm gonna use that.
Talk to him before.
Yeah.
God, I could have saved all this money I've been giving to a therapist.
Well, and that's what I tell people so many times when we have these debates. Because I had somebody who was like, oh, I feel sympathy for trans people because they're obviously mentally deranged. And I'm like, I can give you the names of like 10 organizations of medical and mental health professionals who say otherwise. So I'm curious where you got your degree from.
Not because they get shit on by society at large, because they're mentally deranged. Hey, Captain Empathy, welcome to the party.
Right. Well, and it's so frustrating, and maybe this is it does kind of go along with it. There's a study that was done in Sweden where they were talking about outcomes for trans people who get transition related surgeries. So, sex reassignment surgery, breast augmentation, breast reduction, or facial surgery, or any of the myriad surgeries that trans people get, and they cherry pick the part of the survey that says like, some people do end up committing suicide still after this. And so the conservative headlines were, transition surgery doesn't help. People still kill themselves afterwards. And
if you guys stop being assholes to them,
well, right,
stop committing suicide.
Well, and there was a great interview with the author of the study in the Huffington Post that was like, yeah, actually, I wrote the study, and here's exactly what it says. and
now I snap my fingers in a Z formation.
Right. and of course the result of the study, which is the result of every study like this that I'm aware of, is that it helps a whole lot, but it doesn't solve the problem of society sucking shit. Like, that's kind of what it comes down to.
Or the person could have depression that is unrelated to them being trans. Like, I have anxiety and depression, and it's not because I'm trans. It's because I'm a trans person who also has some mental illnesses.
Right, because you're a human being, and human beings occasionally do end up having those.
What? Really?
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah.
Huh. Learn new things every day.
So, we're coming up on an hour here, so I want to wrap up, but what I would like to hear from everyone is what we can do to help. So, obviously, I feel like hopefully we're all a little better informed, and we all kind of know a little bit more than we did coming in. And so the best thing to do is to now do something about it, right? So, JT, let's start with you. If you could say, like, people who care about these kind of things and want to make a difference, what can you do?
There was hardly a better day in my entire life than the day I admitted to myself I was sick, because it meant that it wasn't my fault. I was just sick, and it was the first step towards getting better. So I'd say the best thing you can do is, if you suspect there's someone around you who is chronically depressed, has a mental illness or something, first, be honest. All the research suggests, like, say you have a friend you think is suicidal. There's a lot of apprehension about saying, like, hey, are you thinking about killing yourself? Because people think I'm putting that idea in their head, which is actually the opposite of the truth. Saying, hey, are you planning to hurt yourself? Do you want to kill yourself? Is one of the best things you can do for someone. So inquire, be interested, and assure people that they could be sick and it's not their fault. And don't try to be a doctor yourself. That's insanely stupid. But do try to get them to a doctor. Try to get them professional help. That's where the real differeces come in. So I say if you do anything, that would be it.
Ari, you want to go next?
I want to talk more to the people who are listening who may be experiencing mental illness right now that's untreated. please, please, please consider therapy. It is the second best thing I've ever done for myself in my life, other than getting away from my toxic family. There are a lot of resources that you can use to find a good therapist. Obviously, the Secular Therapy Project is a great one. If you're not able to find someone on there, I would highly recommend going on psychologytoday.com. They have a huge database of all the therapists, and you can see all their credentials. You can see what insurances they take, what their prices are, their whole, treatment philosophy, the types of things that they specialize in treating. So you can just go on Psychology Today and search in your area and select a mile radius, and you can even select, what certain issues that you're experiencing, and it'll pop up with something for you. And, I hear a lot of people say that they are thinking about going to therapy, but they're not sure if they really need it. If there's any question, please at least try it, because, if your therapist is any good, if you don't need therapy, they will tell you you don't need to be here. Unfortunately, there are people out there that will try and take advantage of you, but I think that's definitely in the minority. And if you go on Psychology Today, you can, find people who are reputable. So please, please consider, if you are not currently getting help for something, please consider doing that, because it is definitely a life changer for sure.
Yeah, that was one of the most impressive things that my therapist ever said to me. Like, I noticed that when we were having therapy, that basically we were just like having conversation, and it was fine. It wasn't like I wasn't getting anything out of it. But she actually said to me, like, "Do you feel like you need to be here?" And I was like, I mean, I feel like I get something out of it, but I don't really need it to cope with life, I don't think. And she's like, "Well, why don't we stop making regular appointments, and like, I'm here if you need me, so reach out." And I was like, "Yeah, okay," because in my mind that was her kind of trying to instill that confidence in me. Like, I've gotten to a point where like I can handle things, but she's still there if I need her.
Right.
So on a couple levels, like I was really impressed with that. So Dr. Lack, what do you got?
I mean, JT and Ari took the big ones, I think. I would
get wrecked, PhD. Get wrecked.
I would definitely, with JT's, echo that, if you have someone that you think is having problems, whether depression, anxiety, eating disorders, whatever it happens to be, ask them, show them that you care and that you're interested. And if they're wanting to try and get help them get it. And that may include, driving them to an appointment, sitting there with them while they make a phone call to, set up an appointment, helping drive them after, a physician or psychiatrist appointment to the pharmacy to pick up some medication. Because a huge thing that we see in many mental health problems is avoidance and withdrawal. I may know that I need to do this or that, but it's just so damned hard for me to actually do it. I need a little push. I need a little help. And I think, doing that as a spouse, a parent, a friend, whatever it happens to be, is so huge, because it says not only do I care about you, but that I'm willing to actually do something. Don't just give somebody those thoughts and prayers, right? Actually do something to help them out, rather than just, oh, well, let me know if you need anything. No, it's okay, well, what do you need? I can do this, I can do that for you. And then I would say second, like Ari said, trying to assure that they're seeing a reputable mental health provider who is well trained in evidence-based practices, who can tell you why they're doing what they're doing, can show you here's the research behind why we're doing what we're doing, and here's how likely it is to help, rather than just, oh yeah, I'm a therapist, I've been practicing for a long time. Well, yeah, they also drilled holes in people's heads for thousands of years, but that didn't really help either, right? So, is someone doing good therapy, evidence-based therapies? So there you go.
Good deal. And, for my part, I'm not an expert. I don't have any sort of diagnosed mental illness. Obviously I have lots of things that I struggle with, and I'm not sure that the diagnosis is the important thing, but I can't really add so much except to echo. In my experience, being an ally and being a friend to folks who struggle with these kinds of things, that really is it. I was really shocked when I initially read that if you think someone is suicidal, that the best thing to actually do is say, "Hey, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Do you have a plan?" Those kind of things, because if somebody's already thinking about it, you're not going to change anything by asking them. And if they're not thinking about it, you're not going to all of a sudden make them want to just by asking the question. And I feel like those conversations have been productive when I've been able to do that with folks. So please do get help. Or if you have friends that you think are struggling, please help get them there. So, before we run, JT, tell us where we can find you on the internet and all the things that you do. Whatever you want to plug, go for it.
I write a blog on the Pathos Network called What Would JT Do? That's my moneymaker. Click on it. You don't even have to read an article. Just click on it and the lights stay on. I have a couple friends who run a podcast, the Game Theory podcast and the God Theory podcast. One of them is one of the foremost experts on the psychology of mass murder. So if you have any real questions of psychology, check that podcast out, call in, and that's all I got. Thanks for having me on. It's been an honor and a pleasure. It really has.
Thank you. Dr. Lack, what do you got?
My main website's caleblack.com, and it's got links to my blog at Skeptic Inc., my YouTube channel, Facebook, etc., and links to things like my books and which you can feel free to go buy.
Very cool, and I will link both of those in the show notes. So thank you both for joining me. It has been joining us. Sorry, I just tend to leave Ari out.
But you're so mean tonight. What the fuck?
I love you, Ari.
We won't leave you out, Ari. Come have a podcast with me and JT. We won't leave you out.
All right, it's on. I'm out of here. Deuces.
And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. Want to say thank you to my co-host, Ari. Thanks, Ari. I love you. I promise I do.
Okay, whatever you say.
Thanks again to Caleb Black and JT Eberhard for their time. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali, and I'm sure Ari's going to do a thing.
Ari Stillman was an average person with a decent job, an apartment, and big dreams, until a chance encounter turned their life upside down. Now, this summer, Ari Stillman is a podcast co-host, and they're about to find out that being a wannabe activist is harder than it looks. Ari Stillman is the co-host, rated PG-13. Find out more on Ari Stillman's official Facebook page or at aristillman4@gmail.com. Derp-de-doop-de-doo.
Tell me that was improvised.
Unfortunately, no, I'm not that clever.
They do this at the end of every episode. There's an outro like this. It's fantastic. I joke about how much I hate it, but it's really one of my favorite things. I love it so much.
Totally crushing Jeremiah. Yes.
If you want to support the work we do, you can head to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. Make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode to support the production of the show and the activism we do. If that's not doable, you can still go to iTunes. Leave us a 5-star rating. That helps us get heard by more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.